everybody. My name is Andris Piebalgs. I'm a part-time professor at the Florence School of Regulation, and we are today in the FSR Policy Debate Series. Today's topic is maximum interesting because we really understand that hydrogen is part of transition to the next energy system. At the same time, we also agree that there should be trading. And if it is a trading, then you assume also there should be a shipping. And if it is shipping, you need a solution that is easy scalable and easy in a way using existing infrastructure or adapting existing infrastructure. So that would be ideal solution because you don't need to expand new infrastructure and then also decommission the previous one. So it is an issue. But there comes a caveat. Because if you do another shipping, then what happens with greenhouse gas emissions? So with moving greening on one side, you could actually make damage on another side. So it should be done all together. So the hydrogen transportation should take also into account how to decrease greenhouse gas emission from maritime. So we have today excellent researchers and young people who have invested quite a lot of time in these issues, Dominic Bruckner and Sotiria Luguvardou. And we from Florence School of Regulations and from EEI, we try to help you to enjoy these presentations. If you have already questions, then please send in the box because we will be rather tight in time. So I will be very happy to see your questions already before. And to introduce the debate, I give now the floor to my colleague, James Kneebone. He is my colleague from FSR. James, the floor is yours.
Hi, Andris. Thank you very much for that. As Andris says, I'm a colleague of his in the Hydrogen and Gas Department of the Florence School of Regulation. So I work on analyzing the gas sector and principally on hydrogen and the value chains and the implications of that transition. I have a very easy job today. I'm just doing this sort of preliminary framing of the discussion, looking at some of the key issues in terms of regulation and also trends that we see in the movement of energy products and decarbonization of the shipping sector, and a few of the, let's say, like ring fencing applications going on. So I'm just going to share a brief PowerPoint before handing over to our main presenters for today. So hopefully you can see well what I tried to present. This. Okay, minimize that. So yes, decarbonizing shipping and shipments is essentially sort of how I see it. So it's two sides. First, looking at trends in shipping, and secondly, trends in the delivery of energy products. And I think today's discussion is a lovely example of sort of the confluence of these two subjects, the interplay between them, and hopefully we'll have some space to reflect on that. So first of all, let's look at trends in shipping. Well, waterborne transport has a share roughly 3 to 4% of total EU CO2 emissions, and of course a larger share of the transport specific emissions, more like 13 or 14%, and therefore it's a considerable portion of emissions to decarbonize anyway. But I would say perhaps looking to the future, you can see that already shipping covers 75% of the EU's external trade in terms of volumes and 30% of internal trade volumes. So really a significant portion of the goods that we move around, and you can see that total volume is increasing. So looking forward, this is a more and more important issue from a pure emissions standpoint, and something that will become increasingly important. On the other side of that, you have the trends in the delivery of energy products. This is specifically on gas. And you see on the diagram on the left, the decline in Russian pipeline gas supplies to Europe, broken down by route. This is something I'm sure everybody's already familiar with, but there's been a sort of structural decline in these deliveries, more or less around since the time of the invasion of Russia in Ukraine, which are really not likely to return. And as Europe's principal gas provider prior to the crisis, you see that Europe needs to make a sort of structural reorganization in the delivery of its gas flows, and at a wider level, the delivery of its energy flows. On the right-hand graph, you can see broken down per route. So the yellow line is the Russian gas. You can see it declining, of course. You can see slight upticks in some of our main pipeline delivery options. So Azerbaijan, for example, you can see a bit of an uptick. Purple at the bottom, various North African suppliers in orange. Likewise with Norway's considerable volumes, but the real significant trend increase is on LNG, which is the green line. You see increasing deliveries over that period that sort of break that usual seasonal pattern. So that's basically just to say that we see a large proportion of the overall volume of goods moving by ship, and more we see energy products, in this case specifically gas, but you could definitely broaden that, being moved by ship as well. So the confluence of these issues makes it a really important subject matter, and it reflects a wider perspective taken, a position taken in Europe increasingly, that these kind of rigid forms of infrastructure for energy trade, predominantly pipelines, let's be clear, have these kind of potential for creating geopolitical security issues, and therefore there's a wider trend in the energy space towards moving towards shipping, which is ultimately a much more flexible form of infrastructure. Now, on the regulatory context, I think there's two issues here. You've got the sectoral targets specifically, which are predominantly climate focused. So this is under the Fit for 55 package, and more widely on the Green Deal, so the drive to decarbonization. And then you have repower in its various forms, which is more on the security side, but of course they intersect very closely. So just very quickly on these sectoral targets, as per Refuel EU Maritime, there's an obligation to cut emissions by 2% in 2025, and it could be as high as 80% by 2050. It's one of the sectors actually with the clearest mandate in terms of these kind of mandatory targets for decarbonization that we have in Europe, actually. So it's really, we see one of the first case applications for these decarbonized RFMBOs, because there is such a clear well-defined demand for it that can be seen, and it can be seen in its incremental increases, as per the diagram on the right. This is very clearly done, and that creates a sort of, let's say, stable known demand looking forwards. More than that, though, there's also obligations on the emission intensity per ship. So this is not just overall intensity. This is not just overall emissions, but this is the emissions intensity per ship, and this includes nitrous oxide and methane as well. So two other important climate forcing gases, which, as we'll see, will have implications for the kind of fuels you would choose to use, as well as shipping emissions being brought under the EU ETS as part of its wider expansion and special incentive regimes for RFMBOs. There's also a zero emissions at berth obligation, but this is more about the onshore power supply and rather than the shipping fuels themselves. But nevertheless, this gives you an impression of where the sector is going. Secondly, on the Repower EU, which, as I said, is predominantly a security focus, but of course, security, competitiveness, and sustainability, sort of the three pillars of European energy policy, have sort of become aligned under one mandate of sustainability in the broadest sense, as renewables get cheaper and we're able to produce them domestically, or at least from a range of suppliers globally. Sort of the democratization of the market, sometimes called. You see these three pillars really coming increasingly close together and increasingly overlap rather than being a trade-off across each other. From, as I say, that security perspective, we've seen a divestment from Russian pipeline gas, although Russian LNG still finds its way to Europe. But nevertheless, as I mentioned in the first slide, an uptick in the delivery of LNG to Europe. And there has been several infrastructure projects which, let's say, will lock in Europe to using that form of infrastructure, moving forward. Provided it wants to amortize those assets in a reasonable time. And the implication from that is, if we're going to hit simultaneously those kind of climate targets at the same time as we're utilizing this established infrastructure, the vectors imported in that infrastructure will need to be decarbonized. And that's where this shipping of decarbonized and clean gases comes in, right? So in a concrete and specific sense, something I'm sure you're already familiar with, Europe has this 10 million tons of imported hydrogen ambition for 2030. 4 million tons of that is already earmarked for ammonia, but the remaining proportion is sort of up in the air. There's this figure at the bottom is from the Commission, and it envisages a roughly 50-50 split between pipelines, but it's drawn somewhat arbitrarily, let's say. So there is still considerable flex in terms of how those total volumes might look. And this kind of LOHC technology we'll see presented today could potentially occupy a meaningful share of that. In the aviation sector, there's likewise as there is in the maritime sector, there are these obligations on sustainable aviation fuels, many of which are likely to come from RFNBOs that are derived from hydrogen. So in that sense, you also have a sort of structural demand being created again in the transport sector. So yes, I think those are probably the primary framing conditions. And I would say, when I look at that, some of the implications that come to mind are essentially the need to decouple a growing demand from shipping from the emissions embedded in the fuels and by proxy in the wider process. So as we discussed originally, this sort of increase in the total volumes, but we want to see a decrease in emissions. So how do we decouple that? And then secondly, how do we optimize our value chains to maximize complementarity where we can? So acknowledge that we are shipping also decarbonized energy products in some cases, whether it be liquid hydrogen, LOHCs, ammonia, methanol, etc. Is there a possibility for complementarity in those value chains, or do they need to be seen sort of in separate? And ultimately, how can both of these aspects be scaled in parallel in time for the 2030 targets? Because it's no good ensuring good complementarity and a nice ecosystem that looks good on paper if these kind of targets are not met. And I think often in this debate, we see a real explicit focus on economics and cost benchmarking, but I think there's also sort of an intrinsic value, a wider value that's more difficult to quantify in terms of security implications or industrial implications that are key to getting this done as quickly as possible. So I'm looking forward to seeing some of these subjects explored today. And probably that's enough from me for now. So we look forward to the discussion, and I'll hand it back to you, Andres.
Yeah, thank you, James. Excellent introduction. I would just now need to give the floor to Dominic Bruckner from Hydrogenius. The topic of the presentation sounds a bit academic, liquid organic hydrogen carriers and making use of oil infrastructure. But my personal opinion, if Dominic is right, then this is a very serious acceleration opportunity for hydrogen trade. So it is really something that is not just on the margins, but really good opportunity. And it could be destroyed only by Soteria, because she would say, well, emissions will explode with your method. But it is still, you need first of all ship things, and that's definitely is the essence of it. And then we need to look what externalities it is. Dominic, we are looking very much forward to your presentation. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Andres. Thank you very much for the really kind invitation and introduction. And I'm very happy. So my name is Dominic. I'm an economist and working as a manager for Hydrogenius. And today I'm trying to give you an overview of LOHC and how we can use existing oil infrastructure. So first off, I'm just going to quickly talk about Hydrogenius, the company I'm working for, and the LOHC technology as itself. And then I'm going to show you where this LOHC technology is already in place. How does it work in reality? And lastly, I will also try to give you a glimpse of regarding also maritime solutions here. But yeah, so in the next 20 minutes, I will cover this agenda. And just to start it off, Hydrogenius, the company, is quite young. We are a startup established at the University of Erlangen-Nuremberg in Germany, and right now we have some minor and big investors and key partners, whom together we try to bring the LOHC technology in front. Right now we are currently a little bit more than 200 employees, and our focus is on the technology, and therefore we have a lot of IP. But more interesting for you, so what is LOHC? How does the technology work? So first off, LOHC, what does it mean? It stands for liquid organic hydrogen carrier. So LOHC basically says that it's a liquid organic which carries hydrogen. It's basically you have everything here what you need to know. However, how does it actually work? So LOHC is a way to transporting hydrogen, and therefore, as you see here in this picture, you load the LOHC. In our case, we as a company use the chemical benzyltoluene. You load this benzyltoluene, this liquid, with hydrogen. This is a exothermic process. So here you don't need energy. Here energy or heat is generated. Once the LOHC is loaded with hydrogen, you can ship this LOHC loaded with hydrogen from A to B. So let's say we produce hydrogen in the MENA region, you load the LOHC with hydrogen, then you ship it, for example, to the EU. And here you have the second important step, you unload the hydrogen from the LOHC. However, quite importantly, here you need energy. So here, this is an endothermic process which requires heat. So to be open here, this is the critical point where we need energy in order to release the hydrogen again out of the carrier, the LOHC benzyltoluene in our case. Also important here is that the LOHC system is a circular system. So this transport step from A to B can be done several times because you can reuse the LOHC itself. So you transport the loaded LOHC from A to B and then the unloaded LOHC from B to A to reuse the same liquids. This is the basic LOHC technique, and this is what we as a Hydrogenious are doing with the chemical benzyltoluene. So it's no magic, it's quite easy to understand. And what is important here to notice are the following things. So why do I think it's a really nice technology? Here is depicted here in the slide. So let's start on the left. What is really important to us is that our solution, LOHC, is quite safe. So you can handle it differently to molecular hydrogen really easily. It's not flammable. So at 130 degrees, it starts to burn, but before that, it's hard to make it flammable. It's also non-explosive. And the hazard potential is comparable to diesel. Therefore, again, as of now, most people are aware of how to handle diesel. Therefore, we think it's safe, also far more safe compared to ammonia, for example. Then in the middle here, the next point which I want to make is that you can use the existing infrastructure because it's a liquid fuel and it's comparable to diesel. Therefore, you can use existing vessels, and I will come to that also in more detail later on. So you can use existing infrastructure because LOHC can be handled at ambient temperature and the ambient pressure. So it's really easy to transport and store. And most importantly, if you compare it to liquid hydrogen, for example, you don't have a self-discharge, you don't have a boil-off, so nothing is lost during the transportation, for example, from MENA region to Europe. So in general, we think that we have a high efficiency when we look at the LOHC system, the LOHC technology. So here the important parameter is that you can store 54 kilograms of hydrogen, in 1 cubic meter of LOHC. And the carrier material benzyltoluene is already available. And lastly, if you talk about the purity of the hydrogen at the end of the supply chain, then the purity of this supply chain using LOHC is quite high. So you can use it in most of the industrial processes without a second purification step. So this is concerning the LOHC technology as it is. And is this reality or is it just theory? We at Hydrogenious already think it's reality, or we don't think it, we did it. And here you see an overview of our projects from left to right. It's what we've done so far, what we are doing right now, and what we are going to do in the future. So on the left hand, top left, you see our first project we did. Here we already provide LOHC to a hydrogen refilling station. And I think this has been done 1.5 years ago. So we proved that the technology is ready, it's safe, it's working. Right now, at the bottom left, this is what we are constructing. So we are scaling up the technology. We are right now building a plant where we aim to transport 1,800 tons per year of hydrogen from Germany to other places, or within Germany. And lastly, then, in the near future, 2027 and 2030, we plan to transport more and more amounts of hydrogen. So we plan with a IPCEI project to transport 8,000 tons per year, for example, from Sweden to Germany. And later on, looking at 2030, we are going to really scale up the technology. We're aiming to transport over 1 million tons per year, for example, from the MENA region to the port of Amsterdam, where we already have an ongoing project. So, but this is the future. Just here is what we have so far, what we already did. Here you see the refueling station, and here you see the LOHC technology working. So basically, what I wanted to just highlight here is what we provide as Hydrogenious is this container where the loaded LOHC is going to be supplied, and in here this is the dehydrogenation box where we release the hydrogen out of the LOHC. And as you cannot see right now because it's below this release station, it's below ground. The LOHC loaded with hydrogen and the LOHC unloaded is stored underground, and those are the tanks. And this is quite the difference if you compare it to compressed hydrogen. So those tanks, they store approximately 1,500 kilograms of hydrogen, whereas if you look to the right here, this is a really easy comparison. Here you see compressed hydrogen, and you see the dimensions. You need a lot more space, and you cannot do this underground. So this is just a really simple comparison. What are some advantages of the LOHC technology? And as I said, this is already working. So we are producing hydrogen at our office via solar panels, and then we are loading the LOHC, transport is the LOHC to this hydrogen refilling station, and then any customer can tank the car, his or her hydrogen car, with the hydrogen we loaded in the LOHC. So, and as I said already, so this is only on a small scale. Of course, we have to scale it up. So right now we are in the construction of the first industrial scale setup. So here we are talking about a capacity of 5 tons per day of hydrogen. And as we're looking to the future, 2027, we are going to hopefully finish the project of building a plant with 24 tons per day of hydrogen. And then prospectively in 2030, we'll look at bigger and bigger projects. So just to give you another glimpse how the technology looks like, this is an example of a storage plant which is going to be built in Germany in the coming years. And here the LOHC is loaded with hydrogen. This is called the storage plant. Similarly, this is on the other side where you unload the hydrogen. This is the release plant, which is also going to be built. The construction is already going on. Okay, so of course, everyone here knows that there's not only LOHC, there's also all sorts of other possible carriers. And to be open, of course, we need all those other forms of transporting hydrogen. However, we think that LOHC is a competitive and very good option to, or nice and safe option to transport hydrogen. So here are just some studies which I wanted to highlight why we believe, and also other scientific and industrial partners believe, that LOHC is a nice way to carry hydrogen. So on the left-hand side, you see the comparison of using pipelines and other carriers, for example, LOHC. And here it's quite clear that the pipelines are only, most certainly a viable option if you talk about small distances. If we talk about distances, for example, from the MENA region to Europe, then it becomes more interesting to look at carriers such as LOHC, which are more a more economic option to transport hydrogen. Also, as James said in the beginning, the LOHC system is quite, or a lot more flexible compared to pipelines, which you cannot, once they're built, they are in place and you cannot change them. In the middle, you see the comparison to other carriers such as ammonia and LH2. So here, what is important to me is that if you only look at economic parameters, then what you see here is that there is not that much of a big difference in terms of how much does it cost at the end. So here you see that ammonia and LOHC are quite similar in their in the prediction of how much they are going to cost. Importantly here, we only compare ammonia to LOHC if it's cracked. So here ammonia is used as a way to transport hydrogen. And here we see that LOHC and ammonia and also liquefied hydrogen are like in the similar range. What we would say is that LOHC is quite competitive here. And lastly, on the right-hand side, what you see is there are also other players on the LOHC markets, and there are different chemicals. So, for example, you can also use toluene. This is also in the similar range of costs. However, again, we use benzyl toluene. It's a different chemical because we say it's easier to handle. It's easier also to transport, and therefore we think it's a really nice way to transport hydrogen. If you don't believe those studies, which are mostly done by industrial consultancies, then you can also look at the at some scientific studies. There's a really nice overview by Genge et al. It was published this year, and here you see a comparison also not only about liquefied hydrogen, ammonia, and LOHC, but also methanol and some other carriers. And what this says is that in 2030, LOHC is one of the cheapest options, and it also can compete in the long term with, for example, ammonia. So I recommend you to read the study. Here it is important to notice that this is an overview over, I think, 30-50 studies. It gives you quite a nice introduction into the topic, into different carriers. But so far, we only talked about the economic aspects. And as James also already said, there are also other perspectives which we have to keep in mind. And one of these perspectives is what is there already existing. And one advantage, if you talk about LOHC, is that we can use existing infrastructure. And here we talk about using every existing infrastructure which is already used by conventional oil. So we can use ships, we can use train and barges, we can use a truck, and you can transport their hydrogen not only to ports but also into the inland of countries. So here, what is one advantage is that we don't have so much investments in order to start the hydrogen transport, and which I will come to in a second, most of the regulation is in place. And lastly, what is maybe the most important part is that people are already aware how to handle oil. And therefore, it's quite safe, in our opinion. If they are used to handling diesel, they should be also, or there should be no problems in handling LOHC. So to make it more concrete, and when we talk about existing infrastructure, we can look at ships. And here it's quite simple to look at the existing ships which are available. And we can compare, okay, we have 3 possible carriers. You can transport hydrogen via LOHC, you can transport it via ammonia, and you can use liquefied hydrogen. So let's start at the bottom. If you want to transport liquefied hydrogen, here you have a big problem because we only have 1 vessel already in place. And so it becomes really hard to transport a lot of, like let's say 1 million tons of hydrogen because you only have 1 vessel in the world. So this is not the best option. Okay, then we can look to ammonia. Here there are already existing vessels, but you have to be first aware of that those existing vessels are mostly in use for transporting ammonia as a fertilizer. And secondly, there are not nearly sufficient number of ships to transport the amount of hydrogen which is going to be transported in 2030. So again, here it's really hard to imagine that such amounts of hydrogens are going to be transported via LPG vessels. And secondly, if you look at also the IEA reports, they state that it's really going to take a lot of time to build such LPG vessels where you can transport ammonia. And therefore, lastly, which I wanted to highlight is via LOHC, you can use existing large scale carriers, and there you already have the infrastructure in place. You can transport the biggest amount of hydrogen per ship. And yeah, so this is one advantage we see of using LOHC. Because of time reasons, I will not discuss this. So you can make an exemplary scenario where you can show, okay, when we talk about the European Union, it's quite easy to use the existing infrastructure. Yeah, but for now, I won't mention this. So just, of course, there are also other issues. And here I wanted to highlight that there are other challenges which are not only important to us as a LOHC company, but which are also important for other carriers, such as ammonia or liquefied hydrogen. So first off, as the transport sector, we have to look at the regulation concerning RFNBO. And as of now, we see a lot of interpretational their playground, so to say. So here, all carriers, as of now, have to make certain that we qualify that the hydrogen we transport still qualifies as RFNBO. Similar is the issue if you look at CBAM. So if you want to import hydrogen, for example, to the EU, then we have to make sure that our supply chains are adhering to the principle and the laws implemented by the European Commission. And lastly, the last points I just wanted to mention are that for us, it's important to look at the regulation concerning the transport in the inland. So here, again, we see an advantage for LOHC because it's easy to handle. And you also need to look at how is the purity defined of hydrogen when it's delivered. So these are also 2 open questions which all carriers, also LOHC and so on, have to look into. Then just, I know my time is running out, so just one glimpse, which also concerns the next talk. So you can use the LOHC technology not only stationary, you can also use it on ships, for example. And there, our sister company, Hydrogenious Maritime, they already developed ships which use the LOHC technology quite efficiently. And basically, what we see here is that you load the LOHC on a ship, and you can then release the hydrogen on board of the ship, use the hydrogen in a fuel cell, And basically, yeah, this also allows for the use of existing infrastructure, so you can repurpose existing ships. The biggest advantages here is that you have a far more efficient process, because the energy of releasing the hydrogen can be taken out of the heat from the fuel cell. So so these are my last words here. This is already one ship. This is ready to be repurposed with LOHC technology, and this should be online then in 2026, where we aim to also decarbonize the maritime sector. I hope that I gave you a quick or short glimpse of the LOHC technology, and if you have any questions, feel free to ask them now.
Yeah, thank you, Dominic. It was really a great presentation. You have 4 questions already under the questions and question box, and 1 in a chat. If you could, during today's event, try to briefly answer the ones that you would like to choose. But I would not allow you just to move freely away. Jan Korniev, from also our colleague from EUI School of Transnational Governance, has looked on this, and he prepared some tricky questions. So Jan, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the excellent presentation. And it's an inspiring and future-oriented innovation. And I think the transport issue as a whole, in the whole hydrogen debate, merits a lot more attention. So I'm very happy that you step forward with concrete solutions. And so now I have 2 challenges I would like to make, because I see the attraction of having a safer molecule to transport, and I also see the attraction of using the existing infrastructure. Now, my first challenge would be on the dehydrogenation, because the reason why we would want to transport hydrogen from the MENA region to Europe is mostly because we could have very cheap hydrogen made by cheap renewable energy in the MENA region, much cheaper than in Europe. Otherwise, we would produce hydrogen in Europe and do it here. So given that reason, one of the drawbacks I would think of this technology is that the energy consumption for the dehydrogenation is at the receiving end, Europe. And presumably, if you want to certify that as green, that would also need to be renewable energy. Otherwise, I think you would increase the carbon intensity again. And that's obviously going against the very reason for the trade in itself, namely that you try to use the cheap renewable electricity from the MENA region instead of the more expensive European one. And then this dehydrogenation goes against. The second challenge I would like to make.
Can I first answer this question, because else I forgot the question, and then it's going to be difficult. So Jan, all your points are quite right. So, but first off, so in our opinion, we need to import hydrogen anyways, because probably we won't have the capacities in Germany, and we will use the green electricity elsewhere. So for the industry which uses hydrogen directly, we think that we need to import, or we will need to import hydrogen from the MENA region. Then, of course, and you're quite right, the dehydrogenation step is the most problematic one, so to speak, in our supply chain. And of course, our technology department already looks into making the process more efficient. But so first off, when we are talking about like generating the heat at the dehydrogenation, what is an option is using waste heat. So what we are trying to do here is that we are building the plants in industrial complexes where we can use the waste heat generated in other processes. Of course, this is an optimistic scenario, but this would be the best case, where we can where we delete many inefficiencies in the process. And secondly, you can use electricity. You need green electricity, then it's still green hydrogen. Or what you can also use is part of the hydrogen which you transport itself. However, here, this is the option which we don't want to make, because this is really too valuable if you burn the hydrogen at the end. So what we are focusing on is using the waste heat, and we are our technology department is looking into making the process itself more efficient. And lastly, just one comment, the problem here, so especially ammonia and the other solutions have the similar problem. So for ammonia, for example, we talk about even more, so you require more heat. So yeah, again, many players facing the same problem. Hopefully I answered your question.
No, very good response. And just on the last point, because that would have been my second, exactly. I mean, it depends on how you look at what is being consumed in Europe. And a lot of the debate, especially also in Germany, is the frame is fuel switching. We keep on producing the same things, but we just switch the fuel, and here comes the hydrogen that we need. Now, I'm challenging that point, and when you look at your graph where you compare with ammonia, obviously that cost is indeed similar if you crack the ammonia back to hydrogen. Now, I would challenge that hypothesis, and I would think that the ammonia that comes on shore in Europe would just be used as ammonia and would not be reconverted into something else. And then obviously you see, I think it's the second large gray block seen from above in the ammonia. Then obviously your costs are down to around 2.5 US dollar per kilogram in this, and you use the ammonia directly, because every conversion has waste, every conversion requires heat. So you would want to minimize the number of conversions, and you have two in your process. Which is, let's say, a disadvantage to having just one, creating ammonia in the MENA region and exporting the ammonia to Europe, or having just one, liquefying it and keeping it in a liquefied status and using it liquefied. So that would be my second challenge.
Yeah, Dominic, you have 1 minute for answer, because we would
Sorry.
like to move to Sotiria.
Yeah, no, again, really good point. So first off, you need hydrogen. So of course, as I already said, we are not comparing LOHC to ammonia, which you use directly. So this is always probably the most efficient option. So, but there are industries which need hydrogen. And here you either need to, you need LOHC, and of course there are inefficiencies. However, there is a recent report also in Germany. It's in German, I'm sorry, it's from the DVWG, DVWG, and they find that the overall efficiency of the process is quite large or quite high for LOHC. And again, I don't know, maybe I'm not an expert on liquefied hydrogen, but it would be a nice option if you wouldn't need to cool it down to minus 252 degrees. If you would have the infrastructure, then I would be d'accord with you. But as of now, we don't have the ships, and therefore, my personal opinion is that this is not a valid option, at least in the short term.
Yeah. Thank you. Now we will move to more broader issue, because James in his introduction mentioned general shipping developments. And with the transition, even if we take offshore, there will be more shipping needed. So that means that greenhouse gas emission abatement from shipping is getting not only important with hydrogen transport, but in general, it is an issue. It's even with a relatively not big amount of overall greenhouse gas emission, it is one of the areas that will be growing if no measures will be taken. So I give now the floor to Sotiria Laguvardu from Technical University of Denmark. Sotiria, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Can you see my screen?
We do very well.
So good afternoon. My name is Sotiria Laguvardu, and I'm a postdoctoral researcher at the Technical University of Denmark, specializing in decarbonizing international shipping. So today I'm going to talk to you about sharing some insights from my latest research, which delves into the marginal abatement cost of alternative marine fuels and the role of market-based measures. So this work marks the final and most important milestone of my PhD journey and was recently published in the Nature Energy Journal. A little bit of the introduction. The research motivation behind this study sprang from the adoption of the initial and actually as of July 2023, the revised IMO greenhouse gas strategy, which set several levels of ambition for greenhouse gas emissions reductions for ships. So one of the main targets of the revised strategy is that it envisages that emissions from international shipping will reach actually net zero by 2050. And how this will be done? The strategy proposes several candidate measures divided into short, mid, and long-term measures with different implementation periods. My PhD and this study particularly focuses on mid and long-term measures, mainly market-based measures and alternative marine fuels. What are market-based measures? There are environmental policies that use market prices and economic variables to enforce the polluter pays principle, and therefore they provide monetary incentives to stakeholders to reduce their carbon footprint. Examples are carbon pricing mechanisms, emissions trading systems, and other offsetting schemes. And they have several attributes. So they are flexible and cost-effective. They let the stakeholders decide what is the most cost-effective mitigation measure to apply to their business to comply with the rule. And also they can upgrade the level playing field of green ships that already use and embrace the shift towards low and zero emission systems. Market-based measures can also have both short and long-term implications. A response to those measures can range from logistic-based advances to the technical adjustments for reducing greenhouse gases. And they can also render low and zero carbon fuels and their supporting technologies cost competitive. When it comes to MBMs, what is also very important is that they gather a lot of revenues, and revenues from MBMs can fund low and zero carbon investment projects for accelerating shipping's decarbonization, and also they can correct market failures because there is a significant concern that market-based measures will have detrimental effects, particularly to lower income economies, small island developing states and least developed countries that are highly dependent on maritime trade. So what is the problem of this study? That in general, uncertainties on the global availability and affordability of those fuels currently are hindering their widespread adoption. And the objective is whether market-based measures can become a solution in the form of an enabler to adopt those fuels. And the research question is, what is the level of carbon pricing needed to close this price gap between alternative fuel and fossil fuel and therefore render them cost competitive? We utilize the method of marginal abatement cost curves, which has been widely mentioned also from the initial and revised IMO strategy as a method to evaluate and validate different carbon mitigation technologies. And in general, MACs have been widely used in environmental theory and energy economics to indicate in a straightforward way the level of the CO2 equivalent tax, which equals the marginal abatement cost. A little bit on the methodology, MAC basically is the ratio of the net cost to implement any measure to the amount of the CO2 it can avert. And if A is the alternative fuel that we want to focus on, then delta N cost to A is the net cost differential to implement A in comparison with conventional fuel. And then delta CO2 equivalent is the tons of CO2 that this fuel can avert in a well-to-wake base of emissions. The inputs of our study, first of all, what we had to identify which will be the alternative marine fuels we would like to focus on. What is the capital cost? Here the capital cost associates with the cost that needs to be burdened by the ship owner to implement the fuel on board the ship, and it includes the cost of internal combustion engine, the specialized fuel tanks to support these fuels, as well as the alternative fuel supply system cost. Fuel prices, primarily we focused on production costs for these fuels, opportunity costs. So the opportunity cost calculations associate with the revenues lost due to these fuels having lower energy density in comparison to conventional fuels, and therefore the cargo space that needs to be sacrificed on board to accommodate for additional alternative fuel storage capacity. And finally, the well-to-wake emissions factors, which account for the well-to-tank and tank-to-wake emissions in a CO2 equivalent basis, which means like upstream and downstream emissions from the production and combustion of the fuels on board. The fuels that we focused on include conventional fuels and their bio and E derivatives, as well as blue and green fuels. The very low sulfur fuel oil and diesel, which is currently the conventional fuel used primarily on board the ship, has been the base of our study as the conventional fuel. Also, we did studies, we applied this study for an LNG carrier that burns LNG, but primarily we focused on the bio and E derivatives, green liquid hydrogen, green blue and gray ammonia as well. The feedstock and production pathway of each alternative are crucial parameters for the study because they determined their well-to-wake emission scope and also explain the rationale behind estimating the production cost. This chart here represents the well-to-wake emissions factors that we accounted for. Actually, the green dashed line indicates the baseline fuel, and as you can see in this chart, some biofuels and some fuels such as gray methanol, gray ammonia, and gray hydrogen that come from steam methane reforming actually have higher values of well-to-wake emissions than the baseline fuel oil. And despite that these fuels have near zero tank-to-wake emissions, operational emissions, they actually have significant upstream emissions, which need to be accounted for. Actually, at the IMO right now, it is only the tank-to-wake emissions that are included that are regulated. But it is important to highlight that accounting for a well-to-wake scope of emissions, we set the right incentives towards scaling up sustainable production pathways for these fuels and therefore serve the sector's decarbonization targets. We did a comprehensive review of studies that estimate production costs for these fuels. The fuel prices were always normalized by unit energy per kilowatt hour to allow for direct comparisons between the alternative fuels on a common denominator basis. This common denominator was the on average power requirements of the ship on an annual basis. And we reviewed both academic and gray literature to attain our values, plus accounting also for the specific production pathway that its fuel has come from. Coming to costs related to capital and operational opportunity cost. So this analysis basically included a case study vessel, and our case study configuration burns very low sulfur fuel oil. We saw that over the past years, the new building prices for this vessel circled around 30 million USD, and we used a system-based approach to that estimates the cost factors basically per unit power as proposed by several studies in the research areas, but also calculated the specific inputs for our particular vessel, a 7.5 megawatt installed power vessel. And for the opportunity cost, as I briefly explained before, we account the additional capacity that is needed on board the ship to accommodate the alternative fuel based on its energy density. And this storage capacity comes with less revenues for the ship operator, and therefore would be to be accounted for in the model. Here are some representative results. As established already, the marginal abatement cost basically is a straightforward interpretation of the relationship between cost effectiveness and carbon abatement potential. And it also allows for comparisons between the different alternative fuels. So the figure illustrates the estimated MAC, or the net present value per metric ton of CO2 equivalent abated on the y-axis, and on the x-axis, the width of its column shows the abatement potential relatively to the very low sulfur fuel oil, in this case, the baseline fuel. We accounted for a low and high bound of fuel prices to capture the uncertainty of the expectations for alternative marine fuel prices, because they were varying a lot in our initial analysis, and the dependency also on exogenous inputs, such as prices of renewable electricity, carbon capture and storage, and also hydrogen carriers, as we mentioned already. This figure, for example, shows the max for a new building vessel in a high fuel price scenario for $100 per ton of CO2 cost of carbon capture and storage and $100 per megawatt hour cost of electricity. A little bit on the data tables, they show the MAC values, the total amount of CO2 averted by implementing the alternative fuel over the vessel's lifetime, the estimated level of carbon pricing that needs to close the price gap, and the percentage of greenhouse gas reductions achieved relative to using the baseline fuel. For example, here, LNG appears to be already cost-effective, therefore it has a negative MAC, and the most expensive solution appears to be e-diesel because of the very high expectations on its production cost in the future. These figures is plotted for a low fuel price scenario. We can see that with the lower expectations on fuel production cost, basically the carbon price is a lower carbon prices need to be realized. Very briefly, also, this analysis focused on vessels that have dual fuel LNG engines as their conventional fuels, and the marginal abatement cost also for fuels in a retrofitting scenario instead of a new building scenario. And this table summarizes the results. It shows the range of carbon tax in the form of price per CO2 that will be required to close the price gap between alternative fuels and conventional fuels. And there is a wide range of recommended carbon prices, but this is expected due to the many uncertainties involved on the fuel production costs, mainly, and the capital cost, because these alternatives are not widely scalable yet and not commercially available. Some of the conclusion of the study: the most significant parameter affecting the MAC of alternative marine fuels is the production cost, which further relates to the vessel's future operating costs. Biofuels demonstrate high technical potential for shipping when we compare their future cost projections, but large-scale supply of biomass is likely to be constrained, firstly due to competition with other sectors, but also other sustainability challenges. The level of carbon pricing should consider the average age of the fleet at the time of enforcement, and higher carbon levies are required to incentivize retrofits to older vessels. Incentivizing the adoption of green liquid hydrogen in a high fuel price scenario, it would require a carbon price of as high as $700 per metric ton of CO2 equivalent. That needs to be multiplied by 3 to account for the fuel price per ton of fuel. And with levelized cost of electricity as low as $20 per megawatt hour, 150 would be sufficient. Finally, carbon pricing aims to shift the sector's demand towards alternative fuels, encourage investments into zero carbon systems, close the price gap with conventional fuels, and scale up the production of green hydrogen and hydrogen-based fuels. Thank you so much for your attention. And if you want to read the study in full, you can follow this QR.
Thank you, Sotiria. Very, very impressive presentation. Yannick, it's again up to you to challenge Sotiria or her research done.
I need to unmute. So, well, thank you very much. First of all, I think this is a very important piece of research, a very timely piece of research, because with the refuel maritime legislation kicking in and a lot of ship owning or operating companies looking into alternatives, this is exactly the kind of data that is needed to make an informed decision about retrofitting or next vessels and so forth. One thing I was, well, one observation, one question. The observation is, if I look at the minimum and the maximum scenario, I think it comes down, as with hydrogen, to we need very cheap electricity. If the electricity price is low, €20 per megawatt hour or $20 per megawatt hour, which is available in renewable in MENA region, but not in Europe mostly, then you can get things done. You can start, you're getting into a range of economic values that become possible at carbon prices of around 100, 150, which is not necessarily far off. So the essence here again is we need cheap electricity. But then my question would be on the capex side, because in innovation it's all about learning. Costs now can come down with scale, with learning, with innovations in the capex and so forth. And so my question is, have you integrated any learning effects into the future? And do you see a potential for bringing the capex costs down and then having perhaps more competitive values, say 5 to 10 years down the line?
Definitely. Thanks a lot for this question. That is true. Actually, we need to also make assumptions on the cost of capital cost, which is, as I briefly said, that it's not, these technologies are not scalable, are not commercially available. So the expectation is that with economies of scale, and when there is a sufficient demand for the adoption of these fuels on board, where there's a regulation is set in place, and then everybody from the shipping chain delves into the adoption of these fuels to comply with the regulations, then also these technologies, the capital cost of these technologies will come down with the more they are adopted. I mean, so basically, yes, we see also here in Denmark marine engines manufacturers, as well as other subcontractors that are producing auxiliary engines, the tanks, fuel systems. There are many components on board the ship that are actually very expensive at the moment, but they are working on to bring the cost down. And when the demand is there, for sure, the competition will increase the affordability of these technologies.
Yes, thank you. We are running out of time. I think I will give to Sotiria just to put your study, link to your studies. There is Gabriela is asking, and there is also a good question from Malek, but it is I think it's more broader. I will try really to go on it. Well, we clearly understand, I believe, that changing as a current pattern of energy system, and also generally how we are living, it will not be easy task. So you try really to do the change, and you should be optimistic, knowing that there will be bottlenecks and some difficulties. But it's also completely wrong to start from zero. And there is also people that believe that you could start from zero and then you will come to the right results. We are just too many in the world, so to start from zero, we can't. So we should be wise how we do transition and ambitious how to do it. I think what Dominique did, he clearly showed that LOHC has a huge potential. Yes, there are weak spots, but this could be dealt with. And for me, it seems also very easy way to do transition, because from public opinion, there will be less, I would say, worries. Ammonia pass, for me at least, I would always be worried also perception. It could be better perhaps from cost point, but there are some other risks that we should not underestimate. But I am not saying that we also should not try this direction. And the same also with liquefied hydrogen. That is the same, and that we really need to continue all the paths. But I believe that the most important, that there is opportunities, you can scale it up, and there are also some challenges that are going to be dealt. On shipping, there are options how to it. Some are very expensive options, some are controversial, like on biofuels. It's true that we should be very cautious not to do harm, but again, it's doable, and it could be done in transparent manner, so that there is less controversy with increased shipping and growing greenhouse gas emissions. So it could be scaled down considerably. In the EU case, it is now there is legislation in place. Now I understand that also there will be also some movement on heavy duty transport and long-term haul transport, because there is agreement on, at least on the EU level, on the greenhouse gas reduction in this type of vehicles. It's again will push to some type of hydrogen use, and for some of it, it will be quite an interesting pathway. So I would like to thank both Dominique and Sotiria, and also James and Jan, really for scaling up what we know about hydrogen transition. And you definitely added a lot of new knowledge to our audience and also to my knowledge. And thank you very much. And I would wish you all the success with your files, because both are absolutely necessary. Both has some controversy built in, but this is controversy that is not ugly controversy. It is the ones that you can improve and address the challenge and again improve and again improve. So thank you very much, and thank you for the audience for being with us today. We will come to these issues sooner than later, because both are in steep development curve. Thank you, and goodbye to everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.